Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the Sophomore album from the 1975. I Like It When You Sleep, for you are so beautiful and yet so unaware of it. You know, there's been a think piece making its rounds on a couple music websites questioning the continued viability of the album review, or at very least of the written album review. Where it was once something that could influence audiences or artists or even drive sales, many major publications have seen in the rise of internet consumers who care less about critics and more about being guided by their own taste. The democracy of public opinion. Now, this is very much a mixed blessing. On the one hand, it's seen the embrace and reanalysis of modern pop music, giving real critical consideration to what's usually derided, but you could also argue that unless the critic has a large enough following, it's not going to help those weirder independent acts that used to rely on a review to break out. What's more concerning is that it's seen the lines between criticism and promotion start to blur across, especially when sites and channels rely on hits to stay afloat, which has also led me as a critic to reassess what my role is. And in this case, it's twofold. Operating as a filter to all the acts I hear throughout the course of the year, especially my recommendations as I can't hear and cover everything, and providing as much in-depth analysis as I can to improve the quality of individual reviews. And yet, no act has so divided traditional critics and the general public as the 1975. I think I can explain why. When I covered their debut album in 2013, I was like many critics in identifying their blatant 80s influences and self-aware self-absorption that was balanced on the edge of emo. In other words, shallow, derivative, kind of insufferable. And yet, I was also like a lot of their die-hard fans in not really caring all that much, or at least more able to relate. Mostly because the group had a gift for gleaming, slightly off-kilter, riff-driven hooks, great bass lines, and a lot of saxophone, with a distinctive vocal delivery from Matthew Healy, and lyrics that had a surprising amount of insight if you chose to read between the lines. In other words, I thought their debut was a real slice of greatness. And while their social media shenanigans got a little bit tiresome, along with the title for this sophomore album that just stank of emo pretension in the worst way possible, I figured, what the hell, and I dove into the 1975 sophomore album, which from the hype and lead-off single was reportedly weirder and more colorful than their very sleek debut. So what do we get? Well, it's certainly different, I can say that. And the more I've listened through this album, there's less of an indie rock parallel than to a straight pop rock record from last year, Astoria by Marianas Trench. The same penchant for earnest theatricality and lyrics that are too clever for their own damn good, extended instrumental interludes and plenty of overdub vocals, and an outright shift from the riffs to more of a synth-driven 80s-inspired sound that still feels refreshingly modern. Hell, I'd argue the 1975 are more forward-looking than Marianas Trench were in terms of their sound. Now, let me make this clear. There are a lot more comparison points that we'll be discussing in a bit, and this album is definitely not better than Astoria. But it's a record that shows the same sort of wild ambition I love to see in the genre, even if there are points where the excesses of that ambition definitely play against them. In other words, making it a very good album, but not quite a great one. So the best place to start would be the instrumentation and production, where there's definitely been a shift away from the jagged, riff-driven sound on their debut to something more rubbery and smooth, harkening back more than ever to the new wave synth pop of the early to mid 80s. And yet, across this album, it doesn't really feel like a throwback. Sure, there are songs like Love Me that might as well have smashed David Bowie's fame and fashion together, with mostly solid results, with that great saxophone canceling out that wailing synth that really got on my nerves, but it's not indicative of the sound as a whole, which alternates between the hollow and wet retro disco of Ugh and She's American, to the smoother, gleaming synths and liquid grooves of the Ballad of Me and My Brain or Paris, or one of my personal favorites, The Sound. Hell, they even dipped their toes into R&B and gospel with If I Believe You or Somebody Else. But the biggest influence on this record is a genre you don't often see touch pop music: post-rock. The easiest comparison might be the most spacious of an Angels and Airwaves or Postal Service song, like on the title track, but there are multiple ambient-inspired interludes that are genuinely interesting enough to keep my attention, like Please Be Naked. And what's probably the most impressive is, despite how varied the sound is, producer Matt Crossy manages to keep it all cohesive. Liquid and clean, yet giving the wind-scorched guitars enough atmosphere to hold the melody, with solid bass lines, very crisp percussion to hold everything together. As such, there are very few points here where I actually find issues. I wasn't wild about a couple synth choices, like the otherwise excellent A Change of Heart in the mid-range, or the slightly off-key drone on the back of This Must Be My Dream that thankfully is overshadowed by the majority of the mix, and especially that saxophone. But the biggest issue comes in the vocal production. And look, for the most part, it's actually kept surprisingly cohesive and well blended. But when you have the second half of the title track, those pitch-shifted samples thrown in, they added nothing. Hell, most of the pitch shifting adds nothing across this album. And none of that is counting the points where it feels like the filters slathered all over Matt Healy's voices are just unnecessary and unneeded. He's got some visceral presence and he can be pretty smooth when he needs to be. So I'm a little baffled why they continue to pile them in. But this takes us to Matt Healy himself. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't quite seem as distinctive behind the microphone as he did in their debut. I'm certain some of it is the production taking away the rough edges, but I also think he downplays certain songs that could have used a little bit more manic energy and intensity, or maybe opted for that backing chorus a little bit more for some more theatrical pomp, because when it does come in, it added a lot to these songs. And as a side note, I get why the album ended with 2 acoustic tracks, and it's kind of amazing they don't feel more out of place than they are, but Healy is definitely not at his best playing this sort of willowy, reserved singer-songwriter, and the backing chorus on Nana definitely didn't help the intimacy of the song. But you know what? I've danced around the elephant in the room far too long. We need to talk about lyrics and themes, and why that Astoria comparison I made at the very beginning of this review is all the more relevant than it really should be, because I keep finding parallels here. They're both 17 tracks long with multiple instrumental interludes, and both have songs near the end of their respective albums about the sickness of a female relative, and they both have the feel of coming off of a wild cocaine binge as they deal with bad breakups for the right reasons and kind of behave like self-destructive assholes about it, including low point moments in a hospital. Now, the 1975 are considerably more detailed in their writing, as you would expect, which helps push more of that veneer of cool and indie sophistication that serves to be punctured at multiple occasions intentionally, but at the same time, those details lead to songs that can get kind of insufferable, and self-awareness can only excuse so much. A Change of Heart is the moment where he realizes he has to dump this girl because she's shallow and she's in it for all the wrong reasons, but the passing mention of his own shallowness when he originally hooked up with her isn't quite enough to counterbalance how callow and brazen the track is, and pointing out how replaceable this girl is. It's kind of crass, man. And while Healy is very much aware of his own hypocrisy and pointing out the shallowness of his partners that conceal the emptiness beneath him, there's a fair few tracks where he knows that he's just the same as them, but it hits a few sour notes that linger longer than I would otherwise expect, most notable coming on Somebody Else, where he is well aware that he doesn't love his ex, and he should be moving on, but it doesn't stop him from spending nearly 6 minutes wishing that that girl wasn't with anybody else. I mean, dude, it's not your business, get over it. And that's another point. This record is definitely not self-contained, and while it can occasionally work for the ambient pieces, I definitely think a tighter construction would have given this album more punch, especially when themes start repeating themselves. Now, that's not saying this sort of reflexive nihilism can't work. The Sound is a great example of where it does, highlighting how similar he and his partner are. Even if they can't really stand each other, they might be perfect for each other. But of course, a lot of this is projection and a faux self-deprecating feel that toes the line of insufferable for me. She's American and Paris are the biggest examples here, and instability is not an excuse to be an asshole here. I wish this album had the maturity to call him out on it more, which takes us to the ending. And this is where the Astoria comparison, I'm sorry, it has to be made. Because on that record, when confronted with the girl coming back into his life, the girl who originally dumped him in the first place, frontman Josh Ramsey accepts that it wouldn't work. He walks away, and paralleling the relationship that he has with the audience in his music, he moves on to a new chapter. On this album, considering there's been much of the same mirror thrown up to the audience, it ends on an acoustic song about his mother's postpartum depression and her turn to drugs in order to escape it. Like mother, like son. Now, this is a pretty good song, but thematically it's a significant problem, because not only does it show no growth or dramatic arc throughout the course of the entire record, it makes the shallow cool, the cover the emptiness themes lack a certain amount of impact from me, feeling more like a hollow justification with a load of implied mommy issues. It just doesn't have the same impact or maturity, because look, on some level, this record is an outgrowth of the themes that started on the 1975's debut album. It might be shallow, reckless, self-destructive, cool, but god damn it if there wasn't something beneath it that meant something bigger and made it all worth it, even if you didn't really know what that was. This record, for as colorful as it can be and as varied as the sounds are, it tries to dig within for some sort of answer and paradoxically feels kind of hollower and smaller as a result, which is the problem when this album meanders for longer than it really should, is going for that larger scale. And the really frustrating thing is that this album knows that it's kind of pretentious and spends half the time winking at the audience for getting the joke, but the clever show-off nature of the album can feel like a mask hiding something that's not quite likable. And sure, that's kind of the point, but you can only excuse it for so long. And look, if you don't care about any of the deeper themes and are just looking for some slick, well-produced grooves and songs, you're gonna get that. So for me, it's a strong 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. I would not say that I like this more than the debut. It just stuck with me more, that debut album. Give it a listen, but to reference the title track, the girl who turns out the lights when she leaves, she's making the right choice. At least in my books. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I can be more than grateful. Just keep in mind, this is my opinion. I totally get if you love this album, but for me, yeah, it just feels kind of hollow the more I listen through it. Good ideas, but just didn't stick the landing. Outside of that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.